prepared a longer version, and however I arrived to what was to me the most exciting part is the discussion about partisans and purists. In his book, Stephen refuses arguments that affirm the superiority of the partisan attitude, and in fact it does even more than this, as we will see by some quotations. This is part of what the things he does in this discussion. So the party is denying the superiority of the partisan attitude, but there are moments where it clearly appears that he indicates that purism is kind of superior attitude, and we will see why. Stephen, in the morning paper, gave us a definition of who is the partisan and who is the purist, but nevertheless I'm going to repeat it because some of you were not here in the morning. So, here's the quotation. A partisan is a fan of one particular sports team. Such fandom can take many forms, some of them more extreme than others. Mild partisanship may consist in identifying with a team and following their progress in the media, watching an occasional game that gets televised. There are cases of extreme partisanship with supporters who follow their team home and away, never missing a picture, adorning their home with memorabilia, thinking and talking of nothing but their team, writing about them and keeping detailed records. I think of myself, I'm this kind of extreme partisanship. Now I'm offering a piece of evidence. So it's me preparing to go to San Siro. Now let's see, here's the purist. So here's again quotation, the purist enjoys the game in a different way to the partisan. They may enjoy working out the tactics of the two teams and seeing how the play develops, how the tactics are adapted to fit new circumstances, and how the game has key moments of drama. They may also enjoy seeing individual skillful players perhaps competing against each other, and may want both sides to play well and all to their full potential. An eventful game may be more pleasing than an uneventful one, and the purist will certainly want to see a good game, but what makes a good game is not necessarily dependent on the result, given that they have little preference for either of the teams. So this is the main feature of the purist, that the purist is indicated here, a little preference for either of the teams, although in the rest part of the book Stephen speaks like the purist has no preference for either of the teams. So in the discussion about these issues there have been offered several arguments, both psychological and moral, in order to support partisanship, and Stephen refuses this argument. I will focus on the psychological arguments. So some of the psychological arguments refer to benefits that can be obtained without sport. Some examples are protection from depression. So as Stephen correctly indicates, even when we lose a match and we have something like a depression, nevertheless, we have a kind of protection from more serious forms of depression, because at least in cases where our team loses, we share this emotion with other people. So the depression is balanced by this sense of integration, community. Then other elements of self-esteem and group esteem. I have the last two slides dedicated to this issue of self-esteem and group esteem. But now I go to specific benefits that result from the sport activity. So, in relation to this, it has been said that the partisan sees a better game. This is said by Stephen's opponent. And here is again a quotation. The purist, it can be argued, in having no interest in who wins, misses some of the crucial elements of a sporting contest. Elliot argues that the purist misses all the benefits of watching sport that accrue from its competitive nature. So here is an example of Stephen's opponent. Stephen accepts the idea that the partisan can find a game more exciting and has a specific perception of the game that others do not share. And we also, who are here, heard this in the morning. However, Stephen says that the purist is not deprived of emotions. Quotation. Some purists can be far more passionate about the game than the partisan. They may see more games, for instance, and the partisan's interest may be limited only to the games of their own team. The purist could research the players, the teams and the tactics in far more depth. Here's one important element, and there are situations like this where it appears that Stephen attributes more value to the purist way of watching sport. So let's remember that the teams and the tactics, the purist could research the players, teams and tactics in far more depth. Although they wear no replica team shirt, the purist may devote more time and energy to the sport than does their partisan counterpart. The difference is that the purist passion may be less conspicuous than that of the partisan. They enjoy an aesthetic rather than competitive perception of the game, and this gives them a gentler, less frenetic enjoyment. But philosophers have recognized that this can be passion and pleasure nevertheless. And we all know Hume is one of them, with his distinction between calm and violent passions. So the calm passion is the passion of the purist who aesthetically enjoys the match. And here is another moment, another quotation where we see that in fact there is a kind of recommendation of the purist view as something that's appearing to Stephen, giving a higher kind of pleasure. Because here Stephen refers to famous Mill's distinction of higher and lower pleasures that also we teach in our courses at our department. So let's see in the quotation. Although the purists don't experience the intense excitement of the partisan when a goal is scored, the purist nevertheless takes a deeper and more satisfying pleasure in the game. They take pleasures in the finer things. They appreciate the game for its aesthetic qualities and will find some such in every game. Their pleasure is not determined primarily or solely by the result, so they may concentrate on other matters: the style of the play, the tactics, the movement of the ball, rapidity, grace, economy, decisiveness, and so on. Purism has further advantages, because the life of the purist appears more joyful and less stressful. Quotation, there will be no more relegation seasons or closing day disappointments, but a life instead enjoying sport for its purely positive and aesthetic aspects. So this was some descriptions of Stephen's positions. I have some worries, so several is exaggerated. I have a few worries here. First, in relation to this last part, it seems unrealistic to me that the life of the purist can be so undisappointed. Disappointments may come not from losing a match, but from seeing a bad match. And here I rely on an analogy with what I see that happens with numerous friends or people who I know and who are very passionate about theater. Some of you know that I'm sometimes in this theater environment involved in these discussions after shows. Although I do not think that after a bad show, these people passionate about theater are so disappointed as I am after Inter loses a match. And there are two persons here that saw me at San Siro after Inter lost the match. No, in fact, only Milica saw this at the derby. Neither saw me when we won a match 4-0. So at that time I wasn't disappointed. But although so, I don't think the disappointment is so strong and deep. Nevertheless, after an unsatisfactory, people passionate for theatre can really feel strong disappointment after a bad show. And after an unsatisfactory whole season at the theatre, they may be even more disappointed, so be really very disappointed. By analogy, I suspect that even the purists in sport are not so protected from disappointment as Stephen says. Certainly, there may be people that only enjoy in beautiful matches, but suffers no disappointment after bad matches. Although I must say I have never met a person passionate in theatre who only enjoys after beautiful shows but does not suffer of disappointment after bad shows. But I'm not able to say anything about purists in sport because the inductive evidence I have is too small, because Stephen and Sinisha, my brother-in-law, are the only two purists that I know. So because of this failure in inductive evidence, my point is only that purism is not a safe protection for pure enjoyment without disappointment. So it's a Moses point. It's not that also purist suffers of disappointment because of bad matches. It's only that there is no protection from sufferance, although they are not partisans, although they do not suffer for losing the match. Then I have also a worry in relation to Stephen's claim that the purist has a better perspective for a deeper enjoyment of the aesthetic merits of sport. Among them, as we saw, the tactic, the beauty of movements, the ability in playing with the ball, etc. Obviously, I agree that there may be some purists whose aesthetic enjoyment is superior in relation to the aesthetic enjoyment of some partisans. But this is not necessarily a rule. I have two examples. So one example of this and one possible example of this. The first example is Sinisha, my brother-in-law, and second, if I understand him correctly, maybe sometimes even Stephen, so the only two purists that I know. Sinisha, and maybe Stephen as well, show something that appears, at least appears to me, as a naive preference for the offensive in comparison to the defensive way of playing football. Here I say Sinisha certainly because he declares this very explicitly. I'm not certain about Stephen. I have only this impression because all the aesthetic examples in football that he shows are examples of offensive, or scoring, or attacking, playing offensive football. Now, in these discussions, I agree that certainly the Guardiola, so for those who know, is a very offensive way of playing football, is the trainer of Barcelona. So the Guardiola, or maybe for more people we can say the Brazilian way of playing football, is other things being equal, more enjoyable than the Catenaccio way of playing football. Now I'll skip on an elaboration of the concept of Catenaccio that I think is not very interesting for the whole audience. And we had a small discussion yesterday at lunch. However, it is not a general rule that the offensive way of playing, as seems suggested by Stephen and is explicitly said by my brother-in-law, so it's not a general rule that the offensive way of playing is always aesthetically superior to the defensive way. So think about the Italian national team that won the World Championship in 1982 with its tactically coordinated activity of the defense, where there were very elegant players like Scirea and Cabrini. Also, I'm speaking about the defensive players, not to speak about the offensive like Bruno Conti, for example. And think about the harmonious and well-organized counterattacks with 5 or 6 players, which was part of the tactic of that team. Or think about the Mourinho, Jose Mourinho, the special one, way of playing, with always 10 active players in defense, so a perfect tactic coordination of the defense. And rapid organized counterattacks with 6 players, so it's very rapid, changing from one stage of playing to the other is a perfect harmony. And last year these 6 players were Maicon, Stankovic, Sneijder, Eto'o, Milito and Pander or Balotelli, depending on the match, on one side. And compare this with the old-fashioned English kick and run style. So now I'm saying old-fashioned because it was the way English teams used to play. Things change a lot in this more recent year. I think one of the person very much deserving for these changes is the great Sir Alex Ferguson. So this comparison obviously indicates the aesthetic superiority of the defensive style in these cases. The two approaches to defensive football that I have remarked instantiate some of the aesthetic values of football indicated by Stephen in the chapter he sent on Friday, Aesthetic in Sport. And in relation to this, I would say that supporting the offensive style as such is as naive as supporting Madonna's songs over Coltrane or Miles Davis by relying on the beautiful melody of her songs, almost always absent with Coltrane and Miles. So I suspect that most of the aestheticians have this preference for offensive football, attacking football, which in fact seems to me not a very sophisticated attitude, which indicates that there can be several cases when the partisan's aesthetics perception is superior to the purist aesthetic perception. Not that the partisans as such, but that single partisans can have a more sophisticated perception that the individual purists, and that there is nothing in partisanship and purists as such that necessarily lead to superiority and aesthetic appreciation. So, among the only 2 purists that I know, there is one, Sinisha, my brother-in-law, with certainly a very naive aesthetic approach to football, and the other one, Stephen, with some worrying symptoms of this same naivete. The worrying symptoms, I have a very poor piece of evidence for this, that all his examples that I remember are related to attacking. So purism is not a guarantee of the superiority of aesthetic appreciation in sport. There is on this small, modest point that I made, purism is not a guarantee of the superiority of aesthetic appreciation in sport. I think that Stephen's argument for the superiority of purism is partly based on an unfair picture of the partisan. So let's see this quotation. The partisan, for example, may consume alcohol. So in something, unfortunately, yesterday, my friend Alberto and me confirmed, because we were drinking a bottle of wine while watching match, while the purist, Stephen, was drinking tea. The partisan, for example, may consume alcohol before a game and go to the stadium to have a good sing-song with their friends and to cheer the goals, but without following the tactics closely. I have, Stephen says, even seen partisans so drunk that they have slept during the game. Their concern is with a good day out. The purists, however, would tend to shy away from alcohol before a game, as it could deaden their understanding of the game they see and ultimately inhibit their aesthetic experience. Certainly, Stephen is right that there are partisans such as those he pictures. But this does not prove anything. Unfortunately, there are even philosophers, even some of them prominent, that some of us have seen drunk or sleeping at conferences. And certainly, it is more frequent to see a drunk partisan at a football match than a drunk philosopher at a conference. But on the other hand, it is more frequent to see a philosopher sleeping at a conference than a football fan sleeping at the stadium. And in fact, I have never seen a sleeping fan at the stadium. But I trust to Stephen that he has. So I accept that this can happen. Everything that is true is possible, is all the rule of historic logics. The partisan who comes drunk at the match, like the philosopher who comes drunk at the philosophy conference, behaves in a not recommendable way, because he or she deprives herself of some of the pleasures of watching sport, as the philosopher drunk, sleeping, deprives herself of himself in enjoying and participating, enjoying papers and participating in the discussion. So, among the things that such a kind of partisan misses is the possibility to enjoy aesthetical, but also emotional, I would say. It is important to remark that the partisan may enjoy aesthetical in sport, even when the team that she supports is playing. So this was a conclusion, saying that partisan described by Stephen is simply an unreasonable and vicious partisan. It's a not recommendable partisan, but it's not an instantiation of a partisan as such. Even reasonable and recommendable partisans would say this is not a good way to participate to a match, to watch football, for example. Now, it is important to remark that the partisan may enjoy aesthetically in sport, even when the team that she supports is playing. So I think that it's too strict the distinction between saying you're the purist, the one who enjoys aesthetically, the partisan only in competition, because I think that the reasonable, well-balanced partisan enjoys also aesthetically. Now, today in the morning, Stephen says, mentions these possibilities of mixture, but the structure of the argumentation in the book appears to me as a confrontation between the aesthetician purist and competitive partisan. So, although Stephen says there can be these mixtures, the structure of argumentation seems to me as there are no such mixtures. Although it is true that for the partisan winning is more important than aesthetic enjoyment, a reasonable partisan, or we may say well-balanced partisan, prefers to win when the team plays well than when it plays bad. So the enjoyment, even the competitive enjoyment, is better when it goes together with the aesthetic virtues of the team. Moreover, a reasonable partisan enjoys more when the team wins in a beautiful match than when it wins in a bad match. Although it is true that, quotation, the partisan supporter would far prefer to see a poor game that ends in a 1-0 win than a dramatic end-to-end, to-and-fro game that their side loses 3-4, end of quotation. It is also true that the reasonable and well-balanced partisan prefers to win in a 4-3 match. Competition is not the exclusive concern of the partisan. Winning in a beautiful match and winning with the team playing well are relevant concerns as well. Finally, the partisan can watch the matches of his or her team in this mixed way, or even merely by the intention to win, while enjoying purely aesthetically in matches of other teams. My situation is a little bit particular, because I'm always partisan in football, but I'm a pure purist in basketball, for example. As a consequence, my claim is that a reasonable or well-balanced partisan can enjoy in everything in which a purist can enjoy. Moreover, there is something available to the partisan that is not available to the purist. And this renders the reasonable or well-balanced partisan perspective superior. Superior in the sense more recommendable. You will more enjoy in this way. I refer to two things. The first is enjoying in competition. Competition is the distinctive feature of sports, like Elvio, for example, remarks, so connecting to the first part of the presentation. So I do not know of any sport that does not have rules about how to win, and playing for not winning is even punishable, as we discussed in the morning. More important for this discussion, competition is something in which people usually enjoy. So humans enjoy competition, sometimes even inappropriately. Like, for example, in philosophical conferences, right, so frequently saw competition in philosophical conferences, which I really didn't find appropriate. It's an indication of how much competition is part of our nature. Well, the purist seems obviously to renounce to this pleasure in the specific case of sport. For Stephen, this does not seem to be a problem. As we saw, he relies on the distinction between higher and lower pleasures and dismisses enjoyment of competition as a lower pleasure, or at least qualifies enjoyment of competition as a lower pleasure. Now, the distinction starts from Mill. He's the author, first author of this distinction. And according to Mill, the expert in determining what are the higher and what are the lower pleasures is a person who has experience in both of them and who can indicate his or her preference. So I can enjoy these kind of pleasures and that kind of pleasures. My preferences are for these kind of pleasures, so I'm an expert, and this is indication that these preferences are higher. Now, as we know, Stephen had a long experience as a partisan and is now a purist. As a consequence, he appears to be exactly the expert required by Mill, so we have to take very seriously what he's saying if we are trusting Mill. However, here there are two problems. The first is a general problem related to Mill's criterion of expertise. There are competing experts with diverging judgments, in general and also here. So there are other people enjoying in the same pleasure as Stephen enjoys, but having different judgments about this. Perhaps Eliot is one of them, I don't know. The second is that the preference for a higher pleasure in comparison with the lower pleasure makes sense when they are antagonists. That is, we cannot enjoy both. But if we can enjoy both, and I have tried to show that partisans can enjoy also aesthetically, then the reasonable strategy is to enjoy both. Apart, obviously, from the case when the lower pleasure is vicious, but I think that enjoying competition in sport is not vicious. Sports exists for competitions primarily. I mean, it's at least their distinctive feature. Second, by his or her detached attitude, the purist now arrived to the second problem I see with purists. Second problem. By his or her detached attitude, the purist deprives herself or himself of part of the aesthetic value of sports. That is their dramatic element. Although the purist can feel some empathy and quotation appreciate the drama that sporting contests are able to produce, end of quote, nevertheless, the purist responds with a calm passion to what in fact is a dramatic situation characterized by intense and not calm emotions. And I think that here the situation of the purist resembles that of a spectator of a tragedy who refuses to be involved fully in the emotional way that is invited by the tragedy. I think that we can uncontroversially say that such a spectator, for example, one who does not full-heartedly feel sorrow for Desdemona, anger and compassion at the same time for Othello, and the most repulsive indignation and condemnation for Iago. In other words, one who does not identify with and take side in the tragedy. So this element, to take side in the tragedy. which seems to be that partisanship is required even when we watch a tragedy. So, such a spectator does not enjoy fully the play, and even he or she does not understand fully the play. So not only not enjoying, but even not understanding fully. My conclusion of this part is that a reasonable partisan is the person who best enjoys in sport, and therefore he or she represents the Aurea Mediocritas between the fanatical partisan and the purist as described by Stephen. A plausible rival model of this person that I call the reasonable partisan is represented by the moderate purist. One who, contrary to the partisan, does not support a team as such, but contrary to Stephen's pure purist, cares about the result and always supports the team that plays in the most beautiful way. So like my brother-in-law that at this moment supports Barcelona, in the past supports Manchester United, and tomorrow who knows. I was the same kind of purist in basketball when I supported Zadar, when for them played Krešimir Ćosić. Then I was a supporter of Partizan Belgrade, where for them played Kičanović and Dalipagić, and so on and so on. Although I also used to be a partisan when the Rijeka team used to play. But I was more a kind of purist. I'm not going to discuss this rival of the reasonable partisan. If you want, we can discuss about this in the discussion. I skip on this because it's a proposal not embraced neither by Stephen nor by me. Before the talk, and here are the last two slides, before ending the talk, I spend a few words in defense of the fanatical partisan. So according to me, there can be, although it's not the model I recommend, nevertheless, I think it can be a model recommendable to some people. Obviously, I exclude from my defense violent people, and I refer to people who emotionally fully identifies with the team and its supporters, and in this way become part of the community of fans. As liberal authors such as Joseph Raz and John Rawls say, it is important for each of us to be accepted in a community that recognizes our merits. In Rawlsian terminology, this is part of the social basis of self-respect. So having a community that accepts and evaluates us. Obviously, many people, because of loss of talents or loss of education or whatever, need not too demanding communities. So communities that do not demand too much from people in order to accept them. So communities that do not require high achievements. A community of fans of such partisans can be exactly such a community. It doesn't demand intellectual achievements, physical achievements. It doesn't demand good knowledge of tactics. It doesn't demand intelligent comments about the match. It demands only loyalty and no specific achievements. In this way, it corresponds to the requirements indicated by Rawls and Raz. And I would say even in a better way than the community indicated by Joseph Raz, that is the nation. But I have no time to elaborate on this, and if you want, we can develop this in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Questions? I will give him preference because he's the author.
Yeah, it was really enjoyable, thanks. I really liked it. One thing, connection between the two talks I've given today, the dispositionality involved. Because I'm a dispositionalist about many things, and I think the dispositional modality explains a lot, and it doesn't worry me too much. I'm happy to concede there will be some partisans who have a deeper aesthetic experience of the game than purists. And so you said at some point, you know, being a purist doesn't necessitate having a better experience. I'm very happy to agree with that, so I'm going to put it all in
Because
terms
nothing necessitates, according to you.
Yeah, so I'm happy to put it in terms of tending, that if you take the purist approach to it, that tends to a better experience, but without any guarantees. I'm quite happy with that. One other thing I'd point out, related to some of the stuff at the end. One of the reasons I got interested in this is through a paper by Nick Dixon, who's one of the big philosophers of sport. He used to edit the Journal of Philosophy of Sport. And he, one of the reasons I'm interested in defending purism is because he had a paper attacking it. So he suggested that the purist has some kind of deep character flaw, which I don't know. Some of the things you said, you didn't exactly say this, but maybe indicating that the partisan is a more rounded individual, because of some of the things at the end about being part of the community. So one of the things Nick Dixon said was that the kind of character flaw the purist might show is an ability to attach themselves to a community. And he said this could reveal itself in an inability to form relationships, as if you are going to be sort of a socially awkward person with no relationship. I found that very amusing because, I mean, I've been happily married for 15 years, and I was reading this paper where he says this. I was reading it in bed one night, and I turned to my wife and said, "Oh, this is so funny. If you're a purist, you can't form a relationship." But I told this story at a conference, and somebody said to me, "Well, if you're reading philosophy papers in bed at night, maybe he's got a point." So that's all I'll say.
So in relation to the second part, I disagree with your opponent, so I would never endorse, and I think really a very naive argument saying purists cannot establish good relations with other people. In this last part, I was only saying there are some people that have difficulties to establish relations with some particularly demanding communities. So but they nevertheless need a community where enjoy the virtues of integration that we need as social beings. So for them, this not very demanding community could be a good solution, but it's not what I recommend. So obviously, the same as Rose does, the first recommendation is the Aristotelian principle. Try to develop all your capacities at the best level. Unfortunately, for some people, either this is not possible or they have not such relevant capacities to develop. And so it's good in the pluralist society to have also some community for them. In relation to the third part, when you say, okay, there's no problem if there is no necessitation, is the problem of the tendency. However, I think that there is a further problem of seeing what are the different tendencies and to optimize the best result. So what seems to me is that we have a tendency to aesthetic, something that has a tendency toward aesthetic enjoyment, and something that has a tendency to improve enjoyment in competition. The best strategy, what I think would be the Aristotelian strategy, looking for the Aurea Mediocritas, is neither to develop one at the total expense of the other, but try to see what is the best balance. So maybe if we can develop both the enjoyment of competition as well as the aesthetic enjoyment, we have to try to do this at the optimal level and not to develop one direction. But second, I even think if the analogy with looking tragedies is a good analogy, that even there may be problems in the aesthetic, and if we take, as you do, excitement as part of aesthetic enjoyment, that there is some loss in the purist attitude, which seems to me like the attitude of most critics that go to theater, that go the formal aspect, and they fully understand what's going on in the drama. But what's required for the fully aesthetic enjoyment, and even more, I would say, by relying on some theories, for the full understanding of the tragedy, is really identifying totally as the tragedy requires, and part of this in some tragedies is even to take side, to be for Hecuba against Agamemnon, to be for Desdemona against Iago, certainly, and partly even against Othello, which is also said by Emilia at the end of the tragedy, which has these very brutal words toward Othello, totally condemning him. And I think we miss something if we do not partly watch the tragedy also taking side, which means as partisans.
Well, yeah, I think maybe the purist loses out in some ways, although I still think they will have a good understanding of the tragedy, of what's happening, because they see all the people around them and they understand what it is to be in that situation. But maybe there's another way in which the partisan loses out, because they're only going to take pleasure in those parts of the sporting event that are in their favour. So yeah, maybe the purist gets a less intense experience, but they can appreciate the drama on all sides. Whereas I think the partisan is only going to appreciate the drama that's in their favour.
Well, I think there is a problem for this position, because I think intellectualizes too much our approach to arts. And think about this situation. So there is a pure intellectual knowledge of a problem. And I rely on Martin Luther King. One of his famous part of his notorious letter from Birmingham jail. He writes that after some time he understood that the most dangerous enemy of he says, the Negro movement. I know now it's not politically correct, but it's the word he uses. So the most dangerous enemy of the Negro movement, King says, is not the full-hearted Ku Klux Klaner. But if he says the moderate white, who says, I agree with your ends, I understand the injustice, I understand the discrimination, but I do not agree with civil disobedience, it's against the law, I can't accept this. And what Martin Luther King says, and then later moral philosopher David Lyons elaborates, is such people do not really understand. And the question is, where is the mixing? Where is the failure in understanding? Well, really, it seems to me there is something missing. How can I say I understand this grave injustice? Nevertheless, I think that even something mild, like very civilized civil disobedience of the civil rights movement at that time, is an exaggeration. There must be something that I really do not understand what is happening to the Negroes. There must be some deeper understanding. Now there are theories of people like Noel Carroll and other authors saying, well, art can provide us this deeper knowledge which follows from emotional involvement. But emotional involvement in seeing this tragedy or discrimination or injustice really is watching, and Carroll has some examples, but unfortunately for me the unknown American authors, so I forget their names. That its involvement in their artwork, for example, can help us But to have such an involvement and to understand fully the artwork and then the situation to which the artwork wants to pronounce, we must watch these as partisans. Obviously here there is still the question of well-balancing, in the sense that if I watch only as a partisan, then a good propaganda or also naive but only morally virtuous novel like Uncle Tom's Cabin would be as deserving as the Othello, let's say, who teaches me something other. So obviously I can't watch only as a partisan, but I repeat, maybe what is really required is well-balancing. Being partisan, but not too much partisan, so also to have some level of detachment to enjoy the aesthetic merit, but to enjoy what's really going on in the drama, I must also partly be involved as a partisan.
So what this is about fans, what about players? Can you play the game with the pure aesthetic, or you must have partisan?
Well, I think you can't, for two reasons. One reason is, maybe three reasons. One reason is related to collective and not individual sports, that the people playing your team will shoot you if you play only aesthetically, will not permit you to continue playing. Second is related to rules, that rules forbids this to you. So the rules required in all sports that I know are rules that require you to play in the best possible way to obtain the best result. So if there is a possibility to really prove that you were not playing for winning, you can be penalized or even disqualified. And the third, I think this would mean going outside the practice of sport, and this is in the first part that I skipped today. But okay, I'm not. Here, this the competition is a distinctive feature between sport and art. Even if I endorse an institutionalist theory, as Stephen does, I think that sport institution must take as part of, they can't be arbitrary and take this competition as part of the definition of their institution. And we see this is, if we compare sports that very much resemble some arts, for example ballet. Let's speak about gymnastics, ice dance or synchronized swimming. We can imagine instances of, for example, contemporary ballet, like the Pet Company from Zagreb, it's the name of the company that Nebojša likes so much and that I hate so much. Some of their shows that we can't visually distinguish for gymnastics as a Olympic discipline, ice dance or synchronized swimming. But nevertheless, what distinguish the practices that in the case of the contemporary ballet, there is no competition. In sport, there is competition. If there is no competition, then it's not sport, it's ballet. So I think it's constitutive of the sport.
I think the only example that I can think of non-competitive sport is Pizzigin.
Yeah, but
They
Pizzigin...
do have competition now, but it's not intrinsic to the game.
Yeah. But this is the reason I think there is a distinction Stephen offers at the beginning of his book. Now the thing becomes a little bit Plotinian, so there is Stephen and then the emanations of Stephen. One of the emanations, I'm speaking for Stephen. So the distinction at the beginning of the book, when Stephen distinguishes between games and sports. So I think Pizzigin is best qualified as game and not a sport. So
Championship. Pizzigin Championship.
If there is a championship, okay, if there is a championship, then there is competition. And if there is competition, then it can be a sport. However, we can distinguish also Pizzigin as in cases of all other sports between sport and recreation, where there are activities that are part of the activity of sport, like playing basketball with friends on Friday evening, but our playing is not part of the institutionalized structure of the sport and can be even not competitive. So usually we go there and each of us play football, tennis, basketball, whatever with friends, counts the result and enjoys in the competition. But competition certainly is not the main goal of this. For example, we would not be blamed by our friends for not having played well, but we could be blamed for not going to the beer after the match. So in fact, the primary goal is stay together, although playing for some result is just an instrument to stay together, to stay together and enjoying together. But I think that
still the partisanship, being involved in wanting to win, is part of the whole activity.
it is part of the activity most of the time, but not necessarily. For example, we all know Snezhana. Once she told me that when she plays tennis, most of the time they don't count the result. So in principle, it can happen that we meet playing basketball and just enjoying playing and not counting the result. Although I think it never happens, but what I'm saying is that, but in any case, it's not a problem for me. In relation to your first question. Your first question was whether can I play not as a partisan?
Yeah.
And I say, if we speak about institutionalized sport, I can't. I must. It's part. First, the rules are such. Second, other people would not accept me if I do not play for winning, and at least the people who play in my team. And third, I think that partisanship is constitutive of the definition of a sport person participating in sport. My impression is that we can say something different for games, but I'm not considering this.
Is the emotion of the player the same as the emotion of the watcher, or they have different feelings, excitements, emotions, whatever?
I think there are similarities of, and I think when we speak about partisans watching, so partisan fans,
Yeah.
I think there is a sharing of emotions, and as we see for sportists, it is important after a victory, for example, to go in front of their fans and sharing. So, while for the partisan, if we read Nick Holmby's book, Feel the Pitch, it seems to me that he describes this in a good way. And he says, for example, about the match, he had the possibility to see the match. And he writes about a disappointment. I read or I heard, I don't remember, about the result. But I was disappointed that this time I really didn't feel as I participated in the victory. So I think that the goal of the partisan fan is to participate in the same emotions of the sport person participating in the game. And I think that the goal of the sport person participating is to attract the watcher to participate in these same emotions. So, for example, you have players or trainers like Jose Mourinho, the special one, who uses to watch the fans and inviting them to support the team stronger. Seems to me it's really invitation to participate with us.
Okay, so I agree very much with what you said about reasonable purpose, and then that you can have.
Thank you very much. That's fine.
Great
Another question.
for aesthetical enjoyment and so on. But doesn't your view imply that if you are a reasonable partisan, that it's better for you to support some team that is good in what they sport, like Inter in football? Because if you support some team that is very bad in playing football, then
That's what I did.
Psychological,
Yeah, that's what I did.
yeah, the psychological arguments would apply in that case again.
Yeah. So this would be an argument for the moderate purist. The point of my talk is that the candidates. So one of the titles of my paper I was thinking about, but it's the title of another paper, so I announced, is Enjoying Moderation. So I think that the two not good candidates are Stephen and myself. So the radical purist and the radical partisan. So we are not good models to suggest. The good models are the moderate purist and the moderate partisan. So I have a preference for the moderate partisan. I will explain why. Your argument is a very good argument for the moderate purist, like my brother-in-law. So this time Barcelona is playing the best football, and if I am a fan of Barcelona, I can put together two enjoyments. The enjoyment of the partisan participating in enjoyment of competition, and the enjoyment of the purist watching my team playing beautiful matches most of the time. And it is a good argument. I think, however, there is a problem with the modest purist, is that the enjoyment of participating in the competitive virtues is too weak, yes, it's too weak. Because I think it's difficult, really, to identify with the team, being a fan of that team in such a changeable mood. So I think that the enjoyment of the moderate partisan could be less sometime, but could be more stable and safe in this sense.
Other questions?
I've just got a slight worry that you're trying to have your cake and eat it, as we say in English. The sort of thing I was interested in is evaluating and comparing these two values. Now, is it best to see sport aesthetically or best to see it competitively? And I've tried to give an answer to which I think is best. Okay, now I'm worried that you're basically saying, yeah, but you can have both. I know you can have both. Yeah, and I think you've got both, and I've probably got both. We're on the spectrum. Yeah, but it seems to evade that question as to whether you can compare these two values. So although the best way may be to have a bit of both, you know, is there still the question about, well, you know, if you could only have one, which would you have? which of these two values would it be best to have the most of? You know, so there's still that question of comparing them, and I think by you trying to go for something in between, it's like you've evaded that question.
Yeah, in fact I have two reactions. One is the strong is not the evasive, and the other is weaker. It is the evasive, as you say. The strong one was that related to Othello, Desdemona, and if the analogy stands, I'm saying, so this is partly also answer to your question, that if this analogy and this argument is good, then I really see that there is something that the purist is missing. The second strategy I have, yes, you are right, it seems as evasive, but I think it is justified, because as I try to see in part of my paper, the question, what is better, is meaningful when there is antagonism between them, in the sense that you can't embrace both. But if you can embrace both, then the real question is not what is better, but the real question is what is the best combination, what is the best equilibrium. So in fact it's not a evasion of the question, it's an attempt to say that the question is the wrong question and that we must have another question, because the question has sense, is meaningful only cases when you can't enjoy both. If you can enjoy both, I don't think it's appropriate to ask that question.
Yeah, but you're saying getting the right combination. I mean, if that combination, the ideal combination is 3 parts aesthetic enjoyment to 1 part competitive enjoyment, then that's kind of a way of saying that the aesthetic is more important. So I think there are still evaluative issues comparing the two ways, even if it is just a matter of finding what's the right combination to get.
Now, if you agree that we can enjoy both, then there is no disagreement between us. So that question seems to me like the question whether it is more important to have a wife and be in love, or to have friends. So my answer would be, why be in front of these questions except in very exceptional cases? But if I think about the structure of my life, my answer is both. And so this is my answer also in the case of purism and partisan. So if your opinion is when we can enjoy both, and the recommendation to give to somebody who wants to enjoy at the maximum level is enjoy both in a right combination, then we totally agree on this position. However, I didn't understand this is your position, because all the structures of your arguments seems to me you can either be, no, you can either, but as you say, you can be a mixture. But the structure of argument is what's better, this or that. And then when you say, okay, this one is the intense emotions, the other the calm passions, like Hume, or even more evidently, when you indicate Mill's distinction between higher and lower pleasures, it didn't seem to me it's a discussion about the best equilibrium, but it seems to me really as a discussion about this or that. Because in Mill's original discussion, the discussion was about, not the discussion, but the example between an unhappy Socrates or a happy pig. So it's not between a Socrates that has also a good marriage with a nice wife, or that Socrates that we know, or a man who's not a philosopher but enjoys a wonderful relationship with a wife. So, yeah.
Try to develop the point, Steven's point, but say that as a matter of fact, So there is a scale from pure purist to pure partisan. And as a matter of fact, we will all be somewhere in between. But if we say that, so we'll be 60, 40, 30, 70, whatever. But if we say that, then we have idea of pure purist and idea of pure partisan. So we can abstract. So each one of us will have both components. But once we accept that, once we say that, then it seems that it follows that we can say study or think about these components in abstraction from the real people. So take other examples in philosophy. Well, who is determinist? Free will determinist. Well, we are all determinists, say 50%, 60%, 70%. But we are talking about the 100% determinist. Say libertarian or communitarian in philosophy of politics. So we all are 80, 20, 50, 50, 60, 30, but when we are doing philosophy, we are discussing pure individualist or pure communitarian. So we are trying to do pull out, to abstract the ideal type, and then to see what's going on with the ideal type. So maybe in that way, even if we, as a matter of fact, are more or less on the scale, more left or right, the discussion about pure purist and pure partisan is completely legitimate.
Well, it may be what I'm saying, but I think that we will not have very good achievements if we have a discussion in political philosophy saying, well, okay, what's better, liberalism or communitarianism? And then we say, let's take as two examples the radical nationalist as the example of the pure communitarian, and let's take the radical libertarian as the example of liberalism. So people like Robert Nozick and Darko Polšek being prominent libertarians, and even Neven Petrović is not such a radical libertarian. I think, how to say, this discussion is meaningful if you think that the two extremes are the most interesting position. But in fact, if you think that the two extremes are not the best positions, I do not see that really you get so much in discussing about the two extremes, that it would be better to discuss of people somewhere in the middle that try to balance in the best way what you can get from liberalism and what you can get from communitarianism. So, for example, you take people like Michael Sandel, who is a communitarian but with important elements of liberalism. You take people like John Stuart Mill, or as we saw together today, Joseph Raz, or John Rawls, who are liberals and who think that community has some value for us. But then the right question is not the question of about the extremes, but the discussion about what's the best moderation.
Even if some combination is, I don't know which sense the best, still it is legitimate, philosophically legitimate, to study the pure cases. Pure purist or pure partisan. Take for instance skepticism. Come on, who is a pure skeptic, perfect skeptic? Nobody. But what we are studying in philosophy, we don't study some moderate position. There are moderate positions, but what we are working on is the pure skeptic. One who is skeptical about everything. So, or foundationalism and coherentialism. Well, probably it's a mixture of both, but let's abstract one and try to see its consequences. How far can we go? How much it can explain? Which obstacles are problematic for it? So, I don't know, the fact that probably the most reasonable view would be some combination, somewhere in between the extremes. That's one thing. And what we as a philosophers should do, maybe we should study the pure cases, the extremes.
Yeah, but think about this. So you start from the extremes. Sometimes you can even insist in the extremes. So for example, in Jonathan Dance's book, Ethics Without Principles, I think is the right title. He says you have this spectrum from particularism to generalism. And he says, as I will try to show, the best position is the most radical particularism. So I recommend this. What doesn't seem to me to be really meaningful is saying, okay, there is this spectrum. There can be combinations. The virtuous position is in some combination. And then I keep on discussing the extremes. So this, for example, seemed to me not to be very helpful. And,